Welcome to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Build Your Best Business focuses on the entrepreneurial journey. What does it take to successfully start, manage, grow, and eventually exit a business? Today, I am joined by Cade Joiner. He is the founder of ShredX Document Destruction, but I've been talking with him prior to the show, and he's investor extraordinaire, several other things kind of going on in his life. So I guess we'll start off with ShredX. If people are not familiar, they should be, yeah?
I hope they are, but be glad to tell the story. So I went to the University of Georgia, and I was very involved with campus politics then. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. to be a political fundraiser. So packed up the car, drove to Washington, and got up there and just absolutely hated it.
Sounds like my computer science degree. So I went to school for computer science, ended up, and I'm like, I'm going to program. Oh, this is no. Yeah.
So I didn't like the weather. I'm a southeastern guy. I love warm weather, and it snowed there a lot, even in D.C. And so about half the way through my trip up there, which lasted about a year, I was in a Barnes & Noble in Annapolis, Maryland, and looking through some entrepreneurial books. Entrepreneur magazine used to have an year-end guide where they would highlight 10 or 15 entrepreneurs from around the world and different businesses they were working on. And I saw a highlight about a guy named Greg Brophy, who started a company called Shred-It International in Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay.
I said, wow, this is an interesting concept. So I didn't have anything with me other than a pen, so I grabbed a cafe napkin from Starbucks and started jotting down notes. I said, wow, this is great. I really like what he's doing here. Took that home and typed up a business plan. Put it in the desk drawer, kind of forgot about it. So fast forward a couple months, it's still really cold. I'm taking the metro into work in the morning, and I said a prayer. I said, God, tell me what I need to do. I'm not happy with my life. And I got off the metro, got off the escalator, and guess what was sitting at the top of that escalator? One of Greg Brophy's shredding trucks.
Okay.
Right there.
Okay.
So I said, there you go, God, there's the sign I needed. And I walked back to my office a couple blocks away, put down my bag and took off my coat. And I called my dad and I said, I'm moving back to Georgia and I'm going to start a shredding company. He said, what in the world is a shredding company? What is that? You've worked your whole life to be in D.C. This is what you wanted to do your whole life. Why would you come home? And I said, it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So I moved from D.C., moved back in with my parents after sort of being on my own for a while. Came back and we started ShredX. I bought a truck with a little bit of money I had saved up, and luckily, after a lot of no's, finally got a local bank that said yes and gave me some financing. And after that, it was just a lot of shoe leather. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life to start from scratch.
Okay.
But I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I was 22, 23 years old. Hadn't been in the real world, quote unquote, that long. And just saw it as an opportunity and put it all on black on the roulette wheel and spun it, and luckily it came up black.
And you started that here in Atlanta? Or?
I did. I actually started in my hometown of Griffin, which is about 40 miles south. It's exactly the midpoint between Atlanta and Macon, exit 205 on 75. So it sort of gave us access to both the Atlanta and Middle Georgia markets. You've got a lot of military and subcontractors down in Warner Robins. And this was a different time. It was a little less digital age than we're in now in 2002. And there were a lot of new privacy laws taking place, HIPAA in the medical community, which requires for the confidential documents be destroyed, and we had FACTA and a couple other federal laws for the financial systems that were requiring that. So all those were sort of just going into effect. So it was we were in a very good space at a very good time.
Yeah.
And luckily my dad was able to come and work for us right away. He was in the textile business, and in the Southeast, a lot of those jobs were going overseas. So It was a very good time for him, and he came on board, and later my uncle came on board, and now we have 12 full-time employees. And in 2010, I stepped away from the business. I sort of gave my dad and uncle the keys and said, you guys, run this. I trust you, and it's grown ever since. It's been a great partnership, and there are people that I can trust that are there to run it. So we sort of talked before about, you can either exit and sell, or you can find great people. And I've been lucky to have great people.
Yeah, exit means so many different things, and people don't think about that often, and they don't understand that, or often don't understand the path is the same. Like, you still need to build an operationally strong company, because if you're going to sell it, someone else has to be able to run it. If you're going to step away from it, it has to run.
Right.
those tenets all fall in the same
systems.
way.
There have to be good systems in place.
Yeah.
And that's what we worked on. And that's why I was able to sort of walk away. And they've done an excellent job of growing the company and helping and supporting our customers. And we've got about 3,000 customers in all forms of business imaginable, from state and federal government down to small one-person offices all over.
Yeah.
And like I said, we have 12 employees and 9 trucks that travel all over. We handle all our own recycling. We actually bale the material at our facility in Griffin, and then we ship it off to paper mills all over the southeastern United States.
Yeah, we were a big customer, and I feel like it was of ShredX because I owned a research company.
Okay, so, I'm sure.
So everything we were doing was confidential under NDA, and we had 4 or 5 boxes because they were spread throughout my facility, and you could just put something in it and get rid of it. Yeah,
it's it's real similar to a lot of subscription businesses. Yeah. You put the containers in the offices, and you come by on a scheduled service, either 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks.
Recurring revenue,
and then you have the recycling revenue after it's shredded, and the paper mills pay you for the paper, and they make other products out of it, so it's very good in use.
On both ends, yeah. Nice, that's really smart.
Well, thank you. I'd like to take credit for thinking of it, but Greg Brophy in Hamilton, Ontario came up with the idea.
Well, it's a twist on a good idea, right? Like my research company was because I walked into another research company, and I loved what they were doing and didn't think they had reached their capacity.
Right. It's funny how things work out.
They're doing like 1.6 million, and there were 3 people. I was like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
What if you did that on a bigger scale, right?
Right. And sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
You can take an idea and improve upon it, put your spin on it. And, one thing we noticed in this market was customer service was really poor with a lot of our competitors. So that gave us an opportunity to come in and, show support to our customers and do what we said.
Yeah.
A lot of our competitors would make bold claims and then there'd be no follow through. So it just left the door wide open for us to come in. And, I've also found small and medium-sized businesses like to deal with other small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah.
They want to be able to talk to the owner, the manager. They don't want to have to go through a bunch of screens to get to the decision maker. And that's definitely helped us grow.
Yeah, awesome. So in that business, what are some, I think you've given us some good lessons, but if somebody were thinking of a service-based business like that, and it feels capital intensive to some degree, you had to have a truck and you had to have a facility, and was being in Griffin helpful because you weren't right there in the middle of the city?
That was one of the major decisions. I grew up there, and so we had a lot of friends and family members there. Luckily, my father had a family member who was willing to help us build a building to suit, which was a great start. We didn't have to come up with a lot of capital to do that. And the rest has just been incremental growth. We've reinvested a lot in the company. We've got a great banking partner with First National Bank in Griffin. They've been very supportive to our needs, and they've helped us grow along the way. But, as far as lessons, you got to just take it slow, and you can't give up. Going back to the beginning phases of that, I remember staying at my parents' house. I had been living in Washington. I was back in my childhood bedroom, and I'd had the first month was probably one of the worst months of my life because I was getting no's and I was getting doors slammed in my face and I was not getting
because people just didn't get the concept.
People didn't get the concept. It was really early, and people didn't get it. And people that I thought would buy, that I knew didn't buy. And I remember hearing, I was just flipping through the channel, and local cable access is a minister in Griffin named Vernon Goss. And his message was about giving time, not effort. And it just hit me upside the head. It was like another sign that, I've got the effort, but I need to let the time pass.
Yeah.
And some people want to work really hard in the beginning, and then they get upset when things don't happen.
Right.
But you've got to give time. And success is good habits over time.
Yeah.
That's the way I view it.
Yeah.
And in that beginning phases, I hadn't just given it enough time. So fast forward 90 days, and things started clicking a little bit better. And then a year later, things were clicking even better. So it was definitely a function of time. And that's the number one lesson I would give any entrepreneur is give it time.
Yeah.
Don't expect a lot of effort in the very beginning to yield a huge bounty.
Right. Well, and consistency, I talk about consistency, patience, and focus. Those are the 3 things. You got to be consistent, you got to be patient, you got to be focused. And then when you get really good, you be aware. Like, what do you do well and what do you not do well? And that's a harder one to kind of...
That's the big one.
Yeah, that's the big one. And people say, well, shouldn't you start there? And I'm like, no one can start there. You keep trying consistency, trying to be patient, trying to have focus. Like, what is it you're doing? And then eventually you're like, you know what? I'm not so good at keeping the books. Maybe I should get that.
Maybe I should outsource that.
Yeah.
And that's something we've tried to do with ShredX is find good partners to work with. We've got a great CPA firm. We've got a great bank. We've got a great company that does our marketing. I don't know how to do all those things individually, but I do know how to find good people and put good teams together.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about being an entrepreneur. You've got to realize your shortcomings, and I have plenty, and find people who complement you and you complement them, and it works well.
So as you've stepped away from more actively being in the business, you're talking now you're doing more investing, is that the case? Is it a similar kind of vertical, or you look at across verticals? Is it an industry? Do you care? Like, what are your guidelines?
I invest in people and teams
Okay.
and implementation of ideas. I hear ideas every single day of the week, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do too.
And we sometimes hear the same ideas.
Just different formats, right? But I look for strong teams. I look for stuff that's cutting edge and new. And then I also look at brick and mortar stuff. I mean, we've gotten in a world where everything's tech and everything has to have an app, and and that's great. But the brick and mortar side of investing, the real estate, that's something I'm very passionate about. I've got units in Athens where I went to school. There's always going to be a need for student housing,
right? And
there's always great plays and deals to be found there. So it's not always just tech and new startups, and that's fun. Being an entrepreneur is sort of sexy now, but
that is why I started this podcast, because I did this back in 2011. And the reason was because so many people wanted to be entrepreneurs.
Right.
So I was like, this is a lonely job.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I just, it's funny. I can remember probably 5 or 6 years ago, one of the first times somebody ever introduced me as an entrepreneur. I never thought of myself as that. I thought of myself as a business owner who worked smart, who took capital.
And I was more introduced as the guy who refused to follow the rules. Because
that too.
My first job was IBM.
Uh-huh.
And when I left 3 years in, and my parents were like, nobody leaves IBM. And I'm like, I'm leaving IBM, right? So you're the crazy one, right?
Right.
So,
yeah. I mean, same with starting ShredX. I mean, people are like, you're in Washington D.C. This is all you've wanted to do since you were 12 years old, and you're going back to start a paper shredding company. What in the world are you doing?
Right.
And, but you got that. And there's always going to be people who wonder, who think, why is this guy doing this? But you just have to trust your gut. That's another piece of advice I would give you. Sometimes you know the truth, and nobody around you knows it.
Right.
But if it's your core truth, go after it.
Yeah.
Get after it. Just do it.
Yeah. Well, how much did your original plan have to change? Were you able to sort of stay consistently with it, or did you have to make some?
I think the original plan ended up in the trash in probably about 30 days. I mean, business plans are great. And I'll be honest, I did the first one, but I've not done one since.
Yeah.
It's more of a gut feel of what will work. And that develops over time. That's not something you get right away. But yeah, it changed constantly. And you have to change. You have to adapt. I mean, we're in a different environment than we were when we started in 2002. And that environment will change even more. Yeah. And you've got to be responsive to that. And you've got to be responsive to customer needs. You just kind of have to keep your ear on the ground and see what's coming.
Yeah. That being okay with change and chaos and uncertainty, that's a part of the personality. If you can't do that, then this is not for you. And if you get to a point where you have rigidity, like you like your life a certain way, whatever, it may not be too. What I want to do, we're going to go to commercial break. I want to come back and I want to unpack a little bit of that, like entrepreneurial being sexy and the thing to do. Like, how does someone know that they're fit for it, or how do you help determine when you're talking with them, and how do you know that you're really potentially doing something that's not entrepreneurial? Because I hear a lot of stuff that's I'm like, not really
entrepreneurial.
Yeah, or that's not really a business.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, there's a lot of that going on because we got a good economy right now. So,
right.
Anyway, so we're going to be back in just a second. We're talking today with Cade Joiner. He's the founder of ShredX Document Destruction and also an investor. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. We'll be right back.
So tell me how you came up with the name Laddering Works.
So it's tied into several things. It has several meanings. So Laddering is the name of the book that I had that came out in 2013, and I'm working on 2 more books in that series. So the first book was about how to find customers and how to create marketing messages. I'm working on one around building teams and then also being a good leader. So how do you run your business effectively, those kind of things.
Nice.
In that book, I teach you that you need to understand why. And we need to understand why very deeply. So you're asking that question multiple times to understand what your customer wants and how they're buying from you. So with laddering, we're helping you scale up. So we're laddering your company up to the next level by deeply understanding what's not working in the company. So what operational structures are missing? What are you not doing on the marketing side? And so we apply the techniques that I talk about in that book, and we ladder your company up. And the interesting thing about laddering is you think about moving up. Well, we actually have to go deep. We have to look up underneath the covers. We have to understand why the structure is not there before we can take you up to that next level. So it plays off a couple of ways, but it's based on that technique. And we're back here listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. The whole reason I put this podcast together is to talk with people like Cade about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and how it's not always the sexiest thing in the world. My story is you sit in your office and you say, "So Eric, what do you think you should do?" "I don't know, Eric. What do you think you should do?" It's very lonely, but we see it as it's kind of it's earned this rock star status.
Right.
And the movie The Big Chill, and I don't know if you're old enough to have seen it.
Might be a little bit before.
Okay. So The Big Chill, one of the friends says, "I'm an entrepreneur," and his friends respond, "Oh, that means you're unemployed." So it was not this banner or badge of honor, right?
Yeah.
So you talked about teams when you're investing, you talked about the people, those kind of things. How do you, what are some of the things that you're vetting about someone when they come up to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I've invented the next great X"?
Well, it's interesting. I have, in the last year, been asked to serve on UGA's entrepreneurship board. They've got a program. They started with under 100 students. Now they have about 500 in all disciplines. They've got kids in the law school and other majors outside of business. So I get to interact a lot with them. So you sort of see from an early age if somebody has that spark.
Yeah.
It is, there's a constant debate. Is an entrepreneur born or is an entrepreneur made? I almost say you're born and you can be honed. But I think it takes a certain personality type, someone who can deal with uncertainty, someone who's not afraid of a little bit of risk, and someone who believes in themselves.
Yeah.
You've got to have a plan. You got to know that it works, regardless of what everybody's saying in your ear, and you got to implement that plan. And that takes, courage, and that takes self-discipline and belief in yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and I told you I started this. I told you on the break I started this to find out, what was missing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem or whatever. And what I've learned is entrepreneurs are a little bit of nature and a little bit of nurture, and they fall into rectifies and magnifies. So they're either rectifying something from their past, and 80% of them are that. So they're proving somebody, something, some way wrong.
Yeah,
Like what you thought of me is wrong. And about 20% of them are magnifies. So they come from amazing family support and backgrounds, and they just feel like they have to magnify that. So Truett Cathy with Chick-fil-A, great example of that, right? Steve Jobs is a magnify. And he's a magnify because when he told his parents that he'd been adopted, instead of them saying, "Oh, yes, you were," he said, "I was adopted, somebody didn't want me." His parents said, "Oh, no, we chose you."
Oh, wow.
And Steve Jobs lived the rest of his life chosen.
That's great.
So he magnified that. And it also explains a little bit of his neurosis.
Well, I grew up, my dad had some entrepreneurial spirit along the way. My grandfather was a real entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He had service stations and owned a lot of land rights around 75 and leased them out. So I saw that sort of from a distance. But I think the real defining moment that turned me into an entrepreneur was when I was 9 years old. My sister was, 4 years older than me, and she had a babysitting gig. I mean, she would go every weekend and get paid. She'd come home with money. And I said to my dad, I want money like my sister. How can I do this? He said, "Well, you're a little too young to do anything." And a couple days later, I saw an ad in the Griffin Daily News for junior newspaper carriers. And I took it to my dad and I said, "Dad, I want to do this. I want to be a junior paper carrier." He said, "Son, that's great, but you have to be 12. I said, "Well, I really want to do it." So my dad called the Griffin Daily News and said, I've got a son. He wants to be a junior carrier. And little did I know, he told the circulation director, Danny Richardson at the time, he said, "Danny, I will make sure these papers get delivered." I didn't know it. So Danny came to my house, and I put on my little tie and jacket and did an interview at 9 years old. And I got the paper out. Yeah. And that started because at 9 years old, I was having to collect. I was having to deal with difficult people. I was having to follow a production schedule, and I was having to do it 7 days a week. Yeah. And I learned so much. I said this at the University of Georgia the other day, and I don't think they really appreciated it. I said, I learned more from that paper route than any class I ever took at UGA.
Amen. I believe. Yeah. I mean, it's it's that practical experience. You know?
Right. And I mean, 9 years old, you go knock on the door, you collect from somebody who had paid you in 90 days, and you learn real quickly how to deal with people.
Right.
You develop people skills on the fly. And that, I thank my dad a million times for doing that. But I think that was sort of the start. You know, I got out, I was able to make a little bit of my own money, to see what it took to make money. To deal with people in uncertain situations, and to do it every single day. It was literally a 7-day-a-week newspaper. So Monday through Sunday, every day. And, you know, I'd get on my bike and pedal up the hills and do everything you could. It took me an hour every day to do it, and gradually got more and more newspapers the older I got. And it was a great experience. I would, you know, definitely recommend to your listeners, if you've got young kids, to put them in a position they can succeed entrepreneurially.
Yeah, empowering them to do that. Like my daughter participated. She came to us and wanted to do this thing called Odyssey of the Mind, which is in some, and that has been one of the key things to her, because they had to organize everything themselves. We weren't allowed to set budgets for them. They had a certain amount. They had to solve a problem. They had to work as a team, and all those functions. Each one of those kids, as we've seen them kind of go through college, you can see them tapping back into some of the stuff they did.
Oh, yeah. It's so important. I've been very blessed. I had a very supportive family. My parents were very, very supportive in what I wanted to do. But I still harken back to some of those lessons I learned, you know, from the Griffin Daily News. I think, you know, this is I jokingly referred to, you know, a customer the other day of ShredX. I said, he's just like the guy who lived on the corner that I delivered the newspaper. He didn't want to pay his bill.
Yeah, you start to get a sixth sense for those things.
You know, going back, if I had to say one thing in my past that sort of drove me in that general direction, it was that for sure.
Yeah. And so as you are using your sixth sense moving forward and thinking about either what's interesting to you in the future, what you're looking at next, like what's interesting to you?
You know, I like working with great people. Being an entrepreneur and having good people to run my company has freed me up to do a lot of things. So I'm involved with the UGA, with the entrepreneurship program there on campus. I'm also chairman of the National Federation of Independent Businesses of Georgia. We've got 8,000 member businesses. Oh, wow. That's something I'm extremely passionate about, is hearing other people's stories. You know, how is legislation affecting their day-to-day business, and educating members of the Georgia General Assembly about problems we're having as small business owners. So that's something I spent a lot of time on. Investing with great teams. I had just lunch this today with an awesome team that's working on a new project, and seeing excitement and being there and giving some of my experience and saying, hey, you know, maybe think about doing it this way, or you know, being able to offer counsel. That's exciting to me, and seeing what's coming, and you know, learning. I love to read. That's one thing I do every single day. Yeah. I read well over 100 books last year, and I'm very passionate about that, about learning.
Well, and the reading thing, fiction or nonfiction for me, I don't know about you, but they're always unlock something.
Right.
You're reading through, and it makes you think about something you're working on differently.
Right, and rereading too.
Yeah.
I usually spend the first part of the year going back over books that I thought were profound in the last year, and I'll always get something, a little nugget different than I did the first time.
Okay, so I'm dying to know. What should I read?
Oh my gosh. Well, another really pivotal thing in the entrepreneurial world was a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah. And I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, and a friend of a guy that worked there, it was his roommate, he kept telling me, he said, there's this great book by Robert Kiyosaki called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You got to read it. I said, sure, I'll read it, whatever, I'll read it. Kept asking me. Finally, one day he comes in, he drops it on my desk. He said, here's this book you've got to read. And you know, I finally read it, and I came back the next week, and I was like, that is awesome. That is one of the greatest things I've ever read. And that really shaped me as a 22, 23-year-old kid. And that guy, remarkably enough, was Patrick McHenry, who was the author of the Jobs Act from North Carolina. Oh, wow. Okay. He was a friend of mine back then, and still a friend of mine today. So, you know, seeing that was very important. Compound Effect by Darren Hardy is a great book. It's short. It's an easy read. I would highly recommend that. That's been two that have really shaped me as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, mine is the typical answer of E-Myth. I went on spring break, I read E-Myth, I came back, changed the entire way we're running our company, and it was just pivotal to the way that we looked at it. And the one I talk about on the show so much that Isaac hates it is Fourth Turning. Mm-hmm. Fourth Turning is a book everyone should be reading. It was written in the 90s, predicts what's going on now, talks all about it. It's awesome. So I was going to talk to you, that National Federation, tell me about that, and I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, the NFIB is, we're in all 50 states, and it's small businesses. You know, most of our members have under 500 employees, and we're just an organization that goes out and promotes small business, especially in the legislative arena. A lot of legislators don't know they aren't small business owners themselves.
Yeah, no, that's why it's so interesting to me, because I always have felt small businesses have a problem getting a voice.
Right, and that's what we are. We're the voice to small business in this state, and we literally have businesses in all 159 counties, everything from one-person operations to huge manufacturers and everything in between.
Yeah.
We survey our membership very regularly to find out what issues they have, and then we go down to the Capitol and we help promote those issues and let people be aware of what's going on. So it's been a great, sounding board to be out there and giving people's opinions that otherwise may not be heard. And it's something I really enjoy. I'm very passionate about small business.
And that ties back to your government, it feels like.
Yeah, it
kind
does.
of brings it full circle.
It pops up some way.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I've always been involved with politics. My grandfather served in the state house and state senate, so I saw that early on. And it's a way that I can sort of give back without actually having to be elected and run a campaign and go out and promote small business. And we see a lot of positive things we do. We're able to go down there and draw some attention. It's like I said, a lot of legislators, they aren't small business owners. They don't have time to learn about every single issue. There are hundreds of issues a session. So if we can go down and say, hey, maybe this is not the best idea, or did you ever think about the consequences of doing this on a small business, and just make them aware. So we're an education group for the most part.
And so in the few minutes we have left, since I've got you here and you've done the successful business, you're doing the investing, and there's all this buzz around, augmented reality, virtual reality, there's blockchain and cryptocurrencies, there's all kinds of things going on. Like, what's exciting to you?
I like AI a lot. That was a meeting we had today, was talking about an AI application. I think we're just barely even scratching the surface there. Blockchain's exciting. Cryptocurrencies, I got in and made a little bit of money and sold it. And just, who knows what's going to happen there, if it can be long-term sustainable. I'm sure some will, some won't.
Yeah.
There'll be a shakeout process. But technology is increasing at such an amazing speed. Fintech is something that, is extremely exciting. I don't think banks are going to exist like they are now in the long term. I just don't think that model is sustainable. The ease of access to capital for entrepreneurs now through fintech companies that wasn't there when I started. I mean, you can get a loan now a lot easier. I mean, I had to knock on a lot of doors to get a small loan.
And you had to have somebody who you established a relationship, who really believed in you, and they were still taking a risk.
Right. It was a guy who I delivered newspapers to, who was on the bank board. And I called him and I said he knew me from delivering newspapers, and that was how I was able to get the foot in the door. But yeah, I think that's going to be a major change. People need to, one thing that your listeners, I would encourage them to work on is being creative. We're going to get in a situation where a lot of jobs are going to disappear in the next 10 to 20 years. And it comes down to being creative. If you go back in the turn of the century, the early 1900s, before the Industrial Revolution, most everybody was an entrepreneur. Right. They were a blacksmith. They owned a store.
That's why you've got to read Fourth Turning.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
It's on the list. I'm going to download it tonight.
Yeah. Return to village, being a blacksmith for the local village, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, and that's happening again right now. I mean, we're having to shift, and as more and more AI comes and more technology, these jobs that you could count on making a good living are not going to be around anymore. They're going to be replaced. Mm-hmm. So creativity is important, coming up with new concepts and new ways. And that just goes down to, sitting down and thinking and reading and reinvesting in yourself. That's an important thing. People need to invest in themselves. Yeah. People get finished with school, they hang the diploma on the wall, and they walk out and they think that's it. Yeah. That's not it. You got to invest every single day.
Well, my daughter's in art school up in Massachusetts, and people will give me crap because she's in an art school, right? They're like, oh, should you let her go to, and I'm like, right. Because the art school teaches her to think. Mm-hmm. They don't teach her to do. They teach her to think. And they also don't care if she breaks rules. Like she'll go in and she'll say, I'm going to try this glaze. And they're like, that probably shouldn't work. She's like, I'm going to try it. They're like, have fun. And that's what life is. It's like trying the glaze and seeing if it works or not.
The most successful people are the ones who are not afraid to break the rules.
Absolutely.
Who are able to do it on their own terms.
Yeah, and you see that even because I did military. I was in the military college for a little while. The people in the military who broke the rules, which you'd think would be the rule followers, they were the ones who always got the promotions, always got moved up. So world of rule breakers. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for taking the time. Yeah, thanks for taking that. And for the success with ShredX, I never knew the story behind it. So that's awesome. That's awesome. So we're talking with Cade Joiner. He's founder of ShredX Document Destruction and also an investor. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Now, what are you going to do until next time to build your best business?